The forest between Blackthorn Ridge and Ashwood had not seen peace in 18 years. Every tree along that border seemed to remember the war, the fires, the howls that once tore through the night. Now, on a quiet morning, with pale sunlight breaking through the branches, a young woman rode toward that same border, for the first time in her life. Her name was Ilaria Vale. She was 22 years old, with dark hair tied back tightly, and a sword resting against her hip out of habit rather than fear. She had grown up hearing stories about Blackthorn Ridge and its king, Draven Cole. In Ashwood, his name was spoken like a warning. They called him cold, merciless. A king who had lost his heart the same year he lost his mate and newborn daughter to an enemy ambush. Ilaria had never met him. She had no reason to feel anything about him at all. And yet, as her horse crossed the old stone marker that separated the two territories, something inside her chest tightened, as if her body knew something her mind did not. She told herself it was nerves. This was, after all, her first diplomatic mission. Her father, Alpha Corin Vale, had chosen her personally to represent Ashwood at Blackthorn Ridge, part of the fragile truce both kingdoms had built over the last 2 years. It was a truce built on paper and careful words, not trust. Ilaria had a duty to help keep it standing. "You will represent us well," Corin had told her the night before, his hands resting on her shoulders. His eyes had lingered on her face longer than usual, something unreadable behind them. "Just remember who you are, Ilaria, no matter what anyone says to you there." At the time, she had thought it was simply fatherly worry. Looking back later, she would understand it differently. As she rode deeper into Blackthorn territory, the forest changed. The air grew heavier, charged with something ancient. Wolves in the distance began to howl, one after another, a chain of sound rolling across the hills like a wave. Ilaria's own wolf stirred inside her, restless, almost eager, though she had never felt anything like this before. By the time she reached the gates of Blackthorn Ridge, a small crowd of guards and pack members had gathered. Their whispers followed her horse's slow walk through the courtyard. She caught pieces of it. "Did you feel that? Who is she?" The wards near the northern gate lit up when she crossed. "That has not happened in 18 years. Ilaria kept her spine straight and her expression calm, the way Corin had taught her. She was here for 1 week, to observe, to speak on behalf of Ashwood at the Treaty Council, and then to return home. Nothing more. Then the doors of the great hall opened, and Alpha King Draven Cole stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked faintly with gray at the temples despite his age. His eyes were a deep amber, sharp and assessing, the eyes of a man who trusted almost no one. Ilaria had expected coldness. What she did not expect was the way his gaze locked onto her and simply stopped, as though the rest of the courtyard had disappeared. "Alpha Cole," she said, bowing slightly, the way protocol demanded. "I am Ilaria Vale, daughter of Alpha Corin Vale. I come on behalf of Ashwood." For a long moment, he said nothing. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved over her face, her hair, the shape of her eyes, lingering on the small crescent-shaped birthmark just below her left ear, half hidden by her hair. "Welcome to Blackthorn Ridge," he finally said, his voice rough, as though the words cost him something. "You may stay in the guest quarters near the east wing." It was a simple greeting, formal, distant, but Ilaria noticed his hands had curled into fists at his sides, and his knuckles had gone pale. That night, alone in the guest quarters, Ilaria could not sleep. The room was comfortable, warm, well-furnished, but her wolf paced inside her, restless in a way she had never experienced. She kept thinking about the way the king had looked at her, not with suspicion, the way she had been warned to expect from Blackthorn Ridge's guards. Something closer to grief, or hope, she could not tell which. She did not know that 2 floors below her, Draven Cole stood alone in his study, staring at an old portrait he had not looked at in years. It showed his mate, Seraphine, smiling, her hand resting on her round belly. He had hidden this portrait away after the ambush that killed her, unable to bear looking at it. Tonight, he had taken it out again, because the girl's eyes in the courtyard had been Seraphine's eyes. Exactly, down to the same golden ring around the pupils that no one else in either kingdom carried. He told himself it was impossible. His daughter had died with her mother. He had held the empty cradle himself. He had built a tomb for a body that had never been recovered, because there had been nothing left to recover, or so he had been told. He did not sleep that night either. The next morning, the Treaty Council convened in the Great Hall. Elders and warriors from both territories sat at a long table, discussing hunting boundaries, trade routes, and the movement of a rogue pack near the eastern hills. Ilaria spoke clearly and confidently when it was her turn, presenting Ashwood's position on shared patrol duties. She noticed Draven watching her throughout the entire session, saying little, his amber eyes following her every movement. When the council broke for the afternoon, he approached her in the corridor, alone. "Miss Vale," he said. "A moment, if you would allow it." She turned, surprised. "Of course, Alpha Cole." He studied her again, the same searching look from the courtyard. "How old are you?" The question caught her off guard. 22, my lord." Something in his face shifted. A flicker of pain quickly hidden. 22 years. Exactly the years since the ambush. "May I ask," he continued carefully, "where you were born?" Ilaria hesitated. It was an odd question from a king she barely knew, but there was something in his voice that made her want to answer honestly, rather than defensively. "I do not know exactly. My father told me I was born during the war, somewhere near the border. He found me as an infant after an attack, and raised me as his own daughter." The words hung in the air between them. Draven went very still. "Your father," he said slowly, "found you. He did not birth you." Ilaria's chin lifted, a flash of old defensiveness rising in her. She had heard whispers about this before, cruel words from other packs suggesting she was not truly Corrin's blood, and she had learned to shut such talk down quickly. "Corrin Vale is my father in every way that matters. He raised me. He loves me. Blood has nothing to do with it." "I did not mean to insult you," Draven said quietly, and something in his tone made her anger fade as quickly as it had risen. "I only meant to understand." He did not explain further that day, but that evening, he summoned a messenger and sent a private letter across the border, addressed only to Alpha Corrin Vale, marked urgent. Corrin received it 2 days later, alone in his study, and his hands shook as he read the single line written inside. "I believe you know something about my daughter. Come to Blackthorn Ridge yourself, or I will come to you." Corrin had known this day might arrive eventually. He had hoped it never would. 18 years ago, during the worst days of the war, he had found an infant girl abandoned in the wreckage of an ambushed convoy, her mother already gone, her father's forces retreating in chaos elsewhere on the battlefield. He had recognized the crescent birthmark immediately, the mark of the Cole bloodline, passed only through direct descendants. He had known exactly whose child she was. He could have used her as leverage in the war. He could have handed her to his council as a prisoner of political value. Instead, faced with a crying infant who had lost everything, Corrin had done something that still surprised him even now. He had carried her home and raised her as his own, giving her his name, his love, and a childhood free from the war that had taken everything from her real family. He had told himself it was mercy. Perhaps it was also guilt, from a war that had cost so many innocent lives on both sides. Perhaps it had simply been love, arriving faster than he expected, the moment she wrapped her tiny hand around his finger. Whatever the reason, he had kept the secret for 18 years, and now it was unraveling. Corrin arrived at Blackthorn Ridge 3 days later, without Ilaria's knowledge, requesting a private audience with the king. Draven received him in the same study where the hidden portrait still sat uncovered on the desk. "Tell me the truth," Draven said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is she mine?" Corrin did not deny it. There was no point anymore. "Yes," he said simply. "I found her the night of the ambush. Your mate was already gone. I could not save her, but I could save your daughter. I chose to raise her as my own, rather than let the war consume another innocent life." For a long moment, Draven said nothing. The grief of 18 years, the rage, the guilt of surviving when his mate had not, all of it rose inside him at once. His claws extended without his permission, digging into the wood of his desk. "You let me bury an empty cradle," Draven said, his voice breaking despite himself. "You let me believe she was dead for 18 years. "I was afraid," Corrin admitted. "Afraid that if the war continued, she would become a target. a peace to be used by either side. I told myself I was protecting her. Perhaps I was also protecting the daughter I had already come to love as my own. Draven's fists clenched, fury and sorrow tangled together so tightly he could not separate them. Every instinct told him to make Corin suffer for the years stolen from him. But another part of him, quieter and more painful, understood exactly why a man might choose to protect a child, rather than use her as a tool of war. "She does not know," Draven said finally. "No," Corin answered. "She believes she is my daughter by blood. She has never doubted it. I never wanted her to." Draven closed his eyes. "That ends now. She deserves the truth, whatever it costs either of us." The following evening, both alphas called Ilaria into the Great Hall together, along with senior members of both packs as witnesses, a decision made deliberately so that the truth would not remain hidden or twisted into secrecy again. Ilaria walked in confused, glancing between her father and the king she barely knew, sensing immediately that something significant was about to happen. Corin spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly beneath it. He told her everything: the ambush, the infant left behind, the choice he had made that night, and every day since, to love her as his own rather than treat her as a political prize. Ilaria stood frozen as the truth settled over her, piece by piece. Her mother, Seraphine, had died protecting her. Her true father, standing only a few steps away, had spent 18 years believing she was gone forever. The Great Hall fell utterly silent, waiting to see how the girl who now stood at the center of two kingdoms' history would respond. Ilaria's eyes filled with tears, though she refused to let them fall. She looked at Corin first, the man who had held her through every fever, taught her to fight, sat with her through nightmares she could not remember the cause of. Then she looked at Draven, a king she had known for only a handful of days, whose eyes carried a grief she now finally understood. "I do not know what to feel," she said honestly, her voice trembling, but clear enough for the entire hall to hear. "But I know this. Blood did not raise me. Corin Vale raised me. That does not change, no matter whose child I was born as." She turned to Draven. "But you lost a daughter you never got to know, and you have grieved for 18 years believing she was gone. I cannot erase that grief. I can only offer you the chance to know me now, as I am, not as the infant you lost." It was not the reconciliation either kingdom had expected, not immediate forgiveness, not instant healing, but it was honest, and in a hall built on decades of hidden grudges and buried secrets, honesty was its own kind of miracle. Over the following weeks, Ilaria divided her time between both territories, slowly building a relationship with Draven, while never abandoning the bond she shared with Corin. It was not always easy. There were arguments, moments of old anger resurfacing, nights where Draven struggled to look at her without seeing Seraphine's eyes staring back at him. But there were also quiet mornings where he taught her small things about her mother, stories Corin could never have known, and evenings where Corin and Draven sat together, two men who had once hated each other, slowly learning to coexist for the sake of the daughter they both loved. The treaty between Blackthorn Ridge and Ashwood, once fragile and temporary, grew stronger with each passing month, no longer held together merely by careful wording on paper, but by something far harder to break: a shared bloodline, a shared love, a single visit that had begun as routine diplomacy and ended by reshaping the future of two kingdoms that had spent a generation as enemies. Years later, when people spoke of the day peace finally came to the border between Blackthorn Ridge and Ashwood, they did not speak of treaties or councils. They spoke of a young woman who rode across an old stone marker one quiet morning, not knowing that her very presence would heal wounds two kingdoms had carried for 18 long years.